Hello and welcome to Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, highlighting artists, teachers, authors, and philanthropreneurs who are committed to planetary purpose, or in other words, a holistic vision for planet Earth. My name is Julian Guderlei, and in today's episode, I'm hosting an interview with Michael Shaun Conaway. Michael Shaun is the CEO and director of Storyworks, a social impact creative agency. His mission is to liberate greatness in people and organizations to redesign our failing systems and create an anti-fragile, anti-rival world, one that works for all. His work is in strategy, storytelling, and branding for leading-edge companies building solutions for a thriving future. In his most recent film project, WeRiseUP, director Michael Shaun explores how we can redesign success at the personal, collective, and universal levels to create a thriving future for humanity. And so with these words, welcome to the show, Michael Shaun Conaway.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. We share a lot of the same passion topics, and you just produced an incredible movie that I can't wait to watch. All the trailers are really impressive. So what led you to start the storytelling into a movie format?
Yeah, the work we've been doing since about the late 2000s, 2008 or 9, was really been with social ventures and personal growth and development companies, any company that we felt was trying to do something good for the people or good for the planet. And we used our kind of ninja skills that we honed doing television commercials and kind of traditional marketing and advertising to try to use what we have in our gifts to make a positive difference. And the more I got into things, the more I realized that nobody really has a holistic view of things. They are trying to either deal with something, little thing they care about, or make an improvement here or there, or they're focused on their for-profit side of their business, and so they have to be really careful about what they do on the for-benefit side. And it just felt constraining to me. I'm like, wow, we really need to take gloves off here. We're in a situation, especially with the climate, where action is required now. It's not required a generation or two from now. And so how do we actually start to make some of these systemic changes? And then the kind of the first piece of that onion is like, oh, well, in order to make systemic changes, we've got to let the world know we need systemic changes and that life could be different than we experience it. It doesn't have to be the way it is now. And, quite to the chagrin of many, kind of enthusiasts over capitalism and the American system, it's not the only way to do it. There's many other ways that we can invent things. And then ultimately, the things that we have now were really designed and built upon intellectual ideas that were really 250 years old. So we have horse and buggy democracy, and we have economics based upon large distances and a seemingly endless amount of material resources. And none of them, and we have internet, mobile, hyper-connected civilization now. Certainly not horse and buggy distances, and we have economics that can very, very, very quickly scale to extract more resources than we have. And, high extraction of resources creates damage to the environment. Then we throw away most of the stuff we extract, and now we have net accumulation toxicity in our dumps and our oceans, et cetera, and all the while we're kind of rowing our boat, and I sometimes think it's the capitalism boat. We're rowing it ever quicker towards the edge of doom. Like how fast can we actually mess up the planet and our lives so badly? Yeah, and capitalism is a growth engine. I mean, especially the way we implemented it, and it served us well. I mean, we've made some amazing leaps humanity has, but the problem with growth engines is that when if they're growing at exponential rates and they consume at exponential rates. So we just looked at, well, how do we get a hold of this whole thing? Like if the story is as big as it is, how do we actually start getting people to see or think of or understand all of that to be able to be something other than paralyzed about it? And so, WeRiseUP was born out of that. Like, where do we start? We thought, well, we got to start where people are.
So powerful, because really the storytelling in itself, right, is very one-sided, and the education is very one-sided. So most people are just continuously in the same loop until you re-educate them. with just a different perspective of asking questions about our cultural paradigms. And we're a global culture now, right? So things truly changed. Fascinating.
Yeah. And I'd like to say we're global, and we have like this limited set of information, and then we have these kind of, in America at least, and really on the rest of the world, these kind of nationalistic movements or protectionist movements versus liberal movements versus highly hyper capital movements. But they're all really in a small set of space. It's not like actually there's a wide set of thinking represented in those. Actually, it's a really small, narrow set of thinking, and then most people don't see it. They don't see that they're trapped in a very, very narrow set of mimetic structures. And so storytelling is the best way to kind of get people to say, oh, wow, there is another way to think about things. And oh, wow, we actually could do things many different ways. And maybe we should be doing them many different ways instead of one way or another. And yeah, so our mission has really been to kind of create that on-ramp of thinking or on-ramp of experience for people in the films we're creating, and then ultimately be able to envision a future that's discontinuous from the state we have now. That's a leap in wild proportions. If you think about the founding of the United States, and not only that, but all the democratic and capitalist movements, going from feudal systems and going from church or wealthy landowners owning everything, or kings and queens owning everything, to private property and to democracy, was a huge leap. It was massive, but the leap we're talking about taking next, I think, is even greater than that. At least it's needed to be greater than that if we're going to avoid the existential dangers.
Absolutely, and it will have to be quite a bit different than in the past, right? I sometimes I like I think Daniel Pinchbeck was quoted to say that, and I recently had him on the show. Like, revolution is an outdated concept. What we need is a metamorphosis, right? And the metamorphosis, in the past, it was usually establishment and then the counter, the revolution to the establishment. But truly, we kind of need both of those to meet at this point. And you kind of have a hard time expecting an establishment to change when things are working in their favor to continue an exclusivity of rights, of power, of money, of whatever it may be. And so the education and the storytelling of broader masses, I think, it's so vital, and I'm so fascinated with that, because this is basically also how this podcast came to be, right? It's just this notion, like, we need to tell more stories around this quotation marks here, like this new earth we're wanting to build, because the earth itself will be the same, but our consciousness will continue to upgrade and up level and expand.
Yeah, great. You just mentioned a couple of things there that are great, because you're right. If we we don't see that establishment and anti-establishment are actually all part of the same thing. We don't see that we just want to reinvent hierarchies, and the anti-establishment is going to become the next establishment, and that old cycle is really not going to get us there. It turns too slowly, and it's not bold enough. If we were to go and interview the lowest 10% of wealth earners in the world, and talk to them about would they really care who controlled the resources if they didn't get a share of them, if they were still the poorest people on the planet? And for them, it's nonsense. It's nonsense that the 1% fights over who controls the 1%. And we have to get to equal access to resources for humans on the planet. And that is not a us and them. It's a we statement, and I think it requires a courage. Courage to let go of that disparity. Daniel Schmachtenberger says a lot that, we and for that matter, Buckminster Fuller, we actually have the resources to take care of everybody. We just choose not to. And we have this hierarchical fear that if I am not dominating and succeeding in this capitalistic paradigm, then I'm failing and falling, and I'm going to starve to death. Well, in a way, we look around at that seems true. There are people that really don't have, and that really do starve, and wow, we don't want to be one of those, and so maybe we should strive, we think. But it's all inside of the same paradigm, versus saying, hey, wait, let's just stop a minute, time out, like, everybody set down their toys for a minute, and let's talk about what would an equitable distribution of resources look like. And as it turns out, we have such mass accumulation, to have people having, tens of billions of dollars of wealth that they can't even do anything with, that they, that becomes trapped wealth, that actually doesn't flow and grow anything. It's ludicrous. But we can't see that inside of things. And so when we started WeRiseUP, that was where we started. It's like, what does success look like? What does it mean for me to be successful? Does it mean get a bunch of stuff, like a big bunch of stuff, like big bunch of stuff, and a big house to put it in, and lots of cars and lots of land? And if I could get a lot, then maybe 2 or 3 generations from now, my family would still have a bunch of stuff. And you look at that, and it's so toxic. You see generations later that they have this kind of, they feel robbed by the wealth that's been left to them more than they feel taken care of by it. A lot of of guilt over where that wealth came from. So that's not it. And then if you're a self-made person, like Moby was in the film and he talked about, like I thought when I got rich and successful and famous, everything was going to be great. And he's like, it wasn't. It was worse. I was less happy when I achieved all those things. And so if we have a success model that bankrupts the planet, that is so off base as far as what's personally fulfilling, then what could be a new success model? And so WeRiseUP, the first third of the movie really looks at shifting from a model of consumption to a model of contribution. What if success was measured on how much you contributed to the world? And then how would you actually go about contributing? Well, you do that by figuring out what your gifts are and what your purpose is, and put them to work where they're most needed. Doesn't have to be big and grand. You don't have to save the world or feed all the starving people, but giving your gifts, whatever they are, in a way that is of service actually is a great model of success. You say, wow, if that gets out of control, everybody's going to be giving to everybody else, and what's going to happen? Well, all of a sudden, all the problems are going to be taken care of. All the people will be taken care of if we actually did that. And then we spun out from individual success, looking at collective success, and what does it look like for us in groups to come together with this contribution mindset. And there's some good models now with social ventures who are making good profits, but also doing good in the world. And I think some emerging models right now we're beginning to look at what is the relationship between my livelihood and my collective livelihood and the world, and how should it be in right proportion? If you look at a natural ecosystem like the rainforest, the waste of any organism is the food for another one. Everything's in right relationship, that things fit together in these systems and patterns. Well, are human beings smart enough to invent ourselves like that? Can we actually fit in such a way that we actually have a net positive impact when we're in the environment? I think absolutely so. I mean,
that's such an exciting question right there, right? Because if you look at what is right now and basing it in reality, we have this 1% kind of phenomena, the separation kind of consciousness instead of the contribution or contributionism. So we're also talking about a transition from a point A to a point B. And so answering the question, I guess we are smart enough. And the question becomes like, what does it take to transition? What does it take to kind of, take apart the current ways of thinking and establishing new ways of thinking that allow for that on-ramp, that allow for that next, that next society system or this cultural system,
Yeah, and the possibility that system may not even be a system. It may be a collection of loosely integrated experiments or loosely integrated different things. I think we have fallen for the monolithic as human beings. We love the empire. We love the big sweeps of monolithic lawmaking and history. But if you look at nature, conifer forests are not standing in the Amazon rain basin. They're not. They're in their own climate, in their own space. Well, what does that mean for human beings? Well, it might mean that, hey, I want to be part of I actually want to own nothing. I just want to have a good place to sleep in 36 cities around the world and projects to work on. I don't care about income. Or maybe that, hey, I actually want to make a thing, but I want to be with other people that make those kinds of things. Well, why would the rules for me, who doesn't want to own anything, and somebody wants to make a thing, why would they need to be the same? There needs to be interfaces between these smaller groups and systems, ways of interacting healthily. But I really think that the solution and the way the future may look very, very small. It may be actually many, many small solutions, because we know, like from entrepreneurship, that once a company gets really, really big, all it can do is swallow up other companies to be innovative. So we have this system where we create a bunch of startups, and they get some capital and they innovate on ideas, and then these big companies come eat them up later. Or if they're really lucky, they become a big company themselves. But it's always in this notion that bigger is better. Well, if smallness happens at innovation happens at small levels, small group levels. Sometimes we talk about the Dunbar number being 150 people. That's the number of people you can know and meaningfully hold relationships with. Well, what if the future of 8 billion people is in 150 person groups and collectives with all different kinds of rules and ways of interacting? And what if that was something that was kind of interacting naturally? I mean, I think that's something for us to look forward to, versus saying, hey, Michael Shaun, are you going to invent the next monolithic system that's going to take care of all the planet and figure out all the ways that we're going to interact? I'd place my bet on the
classic question from the old consciousness, right? It's like, what's the silver bullet solution, and can you make it? I might even pay you $1 billion for it.
That's right. That's right. And I certainly, from being in this conversation with many, many smart people, it's like, we are smart enough to figure out all these things, but we're not smart enough to figure them all out at the same time. Anytime you start to solve one problem, it starts messing up other systems. And so you have these cascading unintended consequences. The only way that we can actually innovate at the speed which we need to is for experimentation and lots of people trying different things. And then quite contrary to human behavior heretofore, is to stop this incessant desire to say that what I'm doing is the best way to do things and it's best for all human beings. To say that this is good for me and the people that actually want to do this thing, and maybe something else is good for other people. And I'm not talking about moral relativism here. I'm not saying that anything goes creates the future of humanity. I am saying, though, that in order for us to solve these really, really big cultural problems, like, for example, how do we move from win-lose game dynamics to win-win game dynamics? How do you, we've not been raised in a truly win-win or omni-considerate, where even the planet's being given a seat at the table. We've not been raised in that environment, so none of us are super well suited to doing it individually. But we could all come up with an experiment. Hey, why don't you and I get together and we'll experiment with this thing where we actually take off the table that one of us is going to do better than the other of us in exchange. Let's just take that off the table and work really diligently to try to imagine that for two communities or collections of people or a group of people. And I think at those smaller levels, we can figure that out. Now, how that translates is that if we have great information architecture, we can share our wins with everybody else. Hey, look, we did this over here and it worked really, really well. Take it and use that. The other piece of that fits right with that is intellectual property. Like, how can we solve the world's problems if every time one of us comes up with a great solution, we own it, and now nobody else can have part of that solution? It's like, what is our gift to humanity if we're charging entrance for it? So how do we?
The interesting part about that, what you're mentioning with both those pieces, is that we already have incoming timelines, incoming reality timelines, where these constructs are getting a little bit less dense, right? So a lot of people who invent new things want to own their rights to it, but some people don't. And like Tesla, for example, that took them a few years, but then they started saying this is actually public good to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
We are at a time on the planet which a lot of people are unfortunately not aware of, but right now we're about 7 or maybe 8 billion people, and half of the planet's population is 28 and younger. Yeah. Which means we're at a time on the planet where half of the world's population grew up with the internet and space travel as a normal thing in our consciousness. So yeah, we're so far beyond the horse carriage and kind of buggy metaphor from earlier. And then these people, me included, I'm 31 at this point, we're longing for systems or post-system world for it to reflect the global way we feel interconnected.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I mean, and youth have less to lose. I mean, that's the way it goes over and over again. I think Timothy Leary said it. That don't trust anyone over 30. I'm over 30, so don't trust me. But like really make your own thing. Figure out what part of that is, and that's a big part of WeRiseUP. Is like, what is yours to do? What is your thing to solve? And who are your people that are going to do that with you? figure that out and get started. I mean, it's really, you know, I think the model or the notion that we used to have of like, oh, I'm going to make money, then I'm going to do good, that's out. Now make money and do good is like good, but even better is like just figure out what it is you're here to do, and figure out how to magnetize the resources to do that, the talent to redo that. And because we have such mobility, you know, especially in the Western world, we have such mobility. Actually, mobility all across the world. I mean, you see so many great engineers from different countries and idea people moving. Now we need kind of cultural agents as well that are going to actually help us to you know, bring in some of the new cultural elements of that. So yeah, and then our film We Rise Up ends up with looking at universal success and evolution waking up to itself, and or self-organizing universe is one of the principles we really believe in, that if you're doing your thing and kind of solving the problems you're out here to solve and reinventing culture and society, that if you just trust that the self-organizing principle is going on, then nobody has to figure it all out. We just have to let it kind of grow up together, and then we get that collective intelligence when we're all doing you know, kind of our highest good and our highest work, and then we're trusting that everybody else is doing that. Then we have this multiplicative effect. And that's different than exponential, right? That's to the third or the fourth or the 100th power versus the power of 2. We actually get this massive rising up of value and recreation for humanity.
So beautiful how you're eloquently putting this, and I think there's a few things I'd love to touch on before we kind of go into how We Rise Up is a movie, but there's also a sequence and certain series that come with it. One of them is trust, and trust is a main topic in all of my episodes. So it just comes up over and over again. And the other one is cultural, almost like, you know, ambassadors or cultural narratives and new cultural pioneers. And for you listening, you know that about me at this point. Like I've been around the world since I'm a teenager, and you know, I started in Paraguay as a 15-year-old, Michael Shaun, and it just took me everywhere. I couldn't stop. I got addicted to it. I turned a polyglot before I was 20. I spoke 5 languages right away, and not because I had this desire to show off with my skills, but simply because it was useful to connect with other humans. And I was privileged enough to get that exposure from life, right? And so it made me realize things about culture that other people can't really see or pick up on, which is how, you know, linear some cultures are, and then how globally we have Americanized, which I think everybody has kind of taken account of at this point. But it made this notion very alive in me, and you just touched on it. In some way, shape, or form, we require cultural role models. And out of some reason, the role models so far have been celebrities and sports stars and athletes and people in the movies. And while I don't think that's completely wrong, I think it's just very limited. And it's a very singular way of spreading culture. And so how did that topic of cultural ambassadors or cultural stewards come up in your movies and your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, I kind of go back to this idea of memetics, and you know, memetics is it's not really a science. I think it's much more like a way to look at what happens in the world. And memetics says that, look, there's these certain ideas that have viral qualities to them. You know, capitalism and American capitalism especially is a very virulent meme. You know, it spreads everywhere, and there's some reasons why. One is it's a very fast-moving structure. We actually can move capital and create things very quickly with it. It's kind of the most and best way to grow something quickly, and people get personal wealth out of it, which means that they get out of, you know, kind of a survival mentality. So it's got a lot of great things. And you might even say the memetics of kind of the American version of that might come from Native Americans and some of the things that the Europeans found when they came here. All these things are great. And you know, like, we need new ideas. I mean, that's just all there is to it. I mean, like, that understanding that ideas are viral like that is great. And we don't want to sit around waiting for the virus that's going to save us all. So we really have to start getting new things into culture. New things start with new experiences, doing new things, 1, and then 2, telling stories about the things that we're doing that carry the value of those experiences. So you go to Paraguay and you have experience of another culture. That's great, but it's even better when you tell a story about it. And you let's say, wow, when I was in Paraguay, they saw things differently. And what I learned about my culture is, and then you share that story with somebody, and then it has a chance to spread. Now, some stories you may have to go to Paraguay to get it for yourself, and that's great. But we really want to find the stories where where they're large enough that they don't require specific experience to understand them, and they're large enough to generate new kinds of behaviors. So, the work we're working on right now is a series called The Futurist. It goes forward 75 years in the future. We look at the future of cities and food and transportation and fuel and the human body and future of the biosphere and future of humans in space. And with each one of these, what we're looking to do is not predict the future. We're looking to tell stories about the future in which we've solved some of these big systemic problems. And so we can get a glimpse. And what would it look like for us to have a world that worked for everybody? What would it look like if humans were net positive to the planet every year? Well, we don't really know. We can make some declarations that it would be good, but we don't want to know what it looks like. So a lot of the work that I'm trying to do right now is give us a picture, a vivid vision of a viable future for humanity. If we can have those visions, then we can work towards them. And I grew up, I'm a little older than you, but I grew up, I was really little when Star Trek first came on TV and first space generation. I was obsessed with space stuff. But if you look at the very first 1969 Star Trek, you go on the deck of the Starship Enterprise, and it's interracial. There's a black woman who's in control of communications, and there's a Russian sitting next to an American, and there's a Scot, and there's a guy who's an alien who pointy ears, and they're all working together. And they didn't stop and say, hey, time out, everybody. I want everybody to notice that we're showing a new cultural paradigm called integration and diversity. They just did integration and diversity like it was normal, natural. And normalizing something like that is powerful. And I don't know if you know a little other anecdote, but Star Trek was the first interracial kiss on TV. You think about it,
I did not know that. That's a massive leap forward. Yeah.
Is this science fiction, or is this a cultural, like a culture change agent concept? And I think it was very much a culture change agent concept. It just happened to be in space. And so we're looking at that, like, how do we show things as being normal and natural? How do we show what would a generation of kids that never grew up with competition as a serious thing? Like, they could compete to play, but not compete where their friend Joey's going to go to a worse college than them, and they're going to get to go to a better college, and then they're going to be rich, and Joey's going to have a job at a grocery store or something like that. It's like, my life is stakes competition. What if you had a generation that grew up like that? Well, we need to imagine that. We need to see how they would be different from us. And when we begin to see how they're different from us and see what their cities are like and see, oh my goodness, they have a city without any roads. Why are there no roads in this city? Oh, because actually transportation is not something that's an individual thing, it's a collective thing. So we don't have to give up 30% of the square footage of our cities to roads, so we can all own a car that sits in a garage, 22 hours a day. And so being able to look forward and imagine a world, not like the world, like a predictive thing, but like Star Trek did, like imagine a world that you might want to be part of.
A possible future, right? Yeah, I mean, Albert Einstein, I think, was quoted to say, imagination is the precursor of the future. And so without that precursor, we don't know where we're even headed.
Yeah, so that's our work. Our next group of films is called The Future of Humanity. We're going to do that kind of factual docuseries, and we're going to do a series about the people that live in that time, and then we'll do a feature film of that. And just the idea is to keep getting these ideas out and generate in the future. We can talk about, like a lot of my friends are involved in the 2030 goals for SDGs and how we're going to get there, and I think that's really, really great. But maybe a different kind of storytelling. It's a little bit more of information kind of storytelling. I'm really interested in this inspirational kind. Like, how can we inspire a better humanity? How can we inspire ourselves, for that matter, to just like figure it out?
Well, you and I drank from the same Kool-Aid, because I've been in a World Economic Forum circle for a few years, the Global Shapers, and I'm definitely a fan of the SDGs. They're the global goals. They're important.
That's great.
And it's the to-do list of the world for the next probably 10 to 15, maybe 20 to 25 years, without being too sure about those timelines, of course. But that's just it. And then what, right? And so without the imagination and the precursors of the future, like we don't even know where we're steering, and basically we're letting mass media control our imagination center, our third eye center, to show us again and again and again just the cleansing of our subconscious from war movies to other history movies to future prediction with more war in them, which is
Yeah. No, we
just
love
not really doing
our
it. Yeah.
storytellers right now want to tell dystopia over and over again. And if you believe that generating a vision of the future creates a future, then our storytellers, by and large today, want the end of humanity to be as messy and ugly and depressing as humanly possible. Of course, there'll be a few heroes that survive, right? But that's like, is that really what we're living into? And what you said is really interesting. Like the SDGs are a great roadmap, and they really help us. Like if we can get to 2030, but the problem is that we could actually achieve the SDGs by just putting, Band-Aids and bubble gum in a broken system and limping it along to being just good enough not to kill ourselves. Right? Is that what we're aspiring to? Is just good enough that we don't kill ourselves, that we have a little bit less financial inequality, that we have a little bit less human trafficking, that maybe we stop global warming at the point where most people are uncomfortable, but some people are like, it just like, if you think about it, it's like, if you were on a cooking show and they gave you a bunch of really shitty ingredients and told you to cook something good, you'd like, I'm going to do my best with these really shitty ingredients. Maybe I can get a roadmap called a recipe that'll get me to something that's edible. But wait a second. Why don't we just stop and say, look, yeah, we could reshuffle this deck a bunch of ways, but maybe we should throw the game out and start again. And that I'm not saying that that's practical. I'm not saying that 8 billion people could just say time out and stop going to work for 4 months or a year or 2 years while we figure out some things. Like maybe we all plant some gardens and just take a meditative break. I'm sure that if we could find a way to make that work, it would be a very interesting experiment. But rather, I'm saying that enough of us need to start considering that the very basic assumptions at the root of everything we do as human beings are not going to work going forward, unless we want to be setting out another 10 and 15-year timeline of more Band-Aids and chewing gum to keep us limping along. Eventually, we have to redesign. Eventually, we have to figure out how to remove inequality. Eventually, we have to stop extracting resources from this environment and other planetary environments. I think people want to say, well, we'll just use up Earth and move out somewhere else. Well, bullshit. I mean, like, Mars is a really harsh place to live. 1/3 Earth gravity. We don't even know if human beings could be born over there. I mean, like, come on, let's not think about going to Mars yet. And then the idea about get to Mars is, oh, we'll extract those resources. No, we have to if we're going to invent something, closed loop materials economy. Figure out how to use all the atoms of everything to recycle into something else. We're smart. We can figure that out. Figure out no more inequality. Figure out how to get equal health care for other people, and then have that be a basis. Like if we could just come up with a basis where human beings could thrive, then we could figure out all kinds of things. And
the beautiful thing about what you just said is we are smart and we can figure this out. It would be just so much easier if we didn't have so much wind coming from the front, like so much counter action by governments, by economics, even by religions, right? Like those three governing entities that are continuously re-perpetuating the old. It's not to discriminate it. It is what it is, but it's simply making the job of innovation a little harder, because I mean, it's also inspiring it to happen faster. That's for sure.
Well, and I think you look at that, like, the old governmental systems, all religious systems, they're a static good, like locking in, like, oh, wow, it's better if people don't kill each other than if they do. So that's a great religious tenet. Or, oh, wow, it's great if people have rights, right? Isn't it great that we have rights in the Western world and democracies? Yeah, it's great we have rights. Lock in that good, but and then that system tends to protect itself, and protect itself against the dynamic energy and dynamic good in the world. And so when we're talking about these things, we're talking about massively disruptive dynamic good. Could there be cases in our experimentation where we actually end up at a lower state than we started? Yeah, there could be. We could mess some things up. And so I think there's a kind of a natural defense system against newness, against innovation. And I'm not saying that it's not even bad, but we have to at least get, like, let's have some temporary autonomous zones. Like, how about we make the state of Colorado an autonomous zone and let us go try a bunch of stuff. If we mess it up, you can come and clean it up later. Whatever, anything, but to say
one
that,
of the possible ways, right?
Yeah, to say that innovation itself is the enemy, especially innovation on the level of ownership, of wealth, of these kinds of things, the things that really threaten the ones that have won. like, you better be really clear about what for. And that's why, there again, I think small makes better sense. If we were to say, hey, look, we're going to overthrow the United States of America, beep, we're going to overthrow the United States of America and install a brand new system, that's a high risk maneuver, right? It's highly risky for the whole planet. But if I'd say, hey, look, in Carbondale, we're going to set up a collective that farms herbs and does vertical growing and has no salaries and group ownership, and we're going to start a cryptocurrency so that we can transfer our IP to anybody that involved. We could, like, what's the risk? I mean, like, really, what's the risk? And then can we get enough deregulation to try that? Now do that times, 1 million projects and 1 million experiments. There's going to be things that popcorn off. They go, whoa, over there, that was 100 people 2 years ago. Now they're 15,000 people. And wow, all their healthcare is like, nobody has to worry about healthcare, and there's no coupling of my work and my income, and everybody, like, education's blowing through this, and there's this cultural flourishing going of like, hey, maybe we should copy that one. And then the 15 that collapsed and didn't work out, maybe we shouldn't copy those. But to allow for that kind of, like Silicon Valley-esque, rapid prototyping and imagination space would be great, as long as we're not doing it so that somebody else can get rich again and monopolize on the human ingenuity. If we can keep it open, we can keep it free, we can transfer one thing to the other, then we can work our way up to these very, very aspirational places, like omni-consideration, or playing an infinite game, or game B, as Jordan Hall talks about. Like, we can lever ourselves into those states through transitionary layers, but we're not likely to do it like in a large system. I don't think we're going to invent the one cryptocurrency that's going to collapse the world economy and then substitute it for another one, and it's all going to be groovy and great. My guess is that, like I say, we'll go small, and a lot of us will go small, and we'll be agile, and we'll think quickly. And thank God there's so many people under the age of 28 right now. They have less to lose, right? Less to lose. Less to lose is good.
So interesting. In what you just shared, there are at least 5 or 6 hooks where I would love to have a longer conversation. We could talk for hours about that, but I'll let that rest for now, because it was so inspiring and positively intriguing. I have another question for you, which kind of goes about the topic of trust, which is what we talked about. But I would just want to ask you personally, like, what is required for you to feel and experience trust?
Yeah, great question. I think most of the way I view the world is around kind of what are our expressed behavioral values. What do we expressly say we care about in the world? In other words, through our actions, not our arguments or our politics or things like that, but how do we show up and demonstrate our care? And so for me, I need to see that in the world. I need to see that with people I collaborate with. That we've both, for example, for me to feel trust, I need to feel like I care about people and they care about me. Demonstration of care is really important. And so, I think in the past, like, ancient human had to be that, right? We had, you didn't want somebody in our tribe that was, messing things up and hurting people. And you go on out, go join somebody else. We're going to stay here where it's all good. And I think through our intermediation of money, our intermediation of laws and collective systems, we sometimes lose track of the very basic human need to relate and to be having the same vision, not to wax too emotional on it, but love. Like, if there's love present, then it's really easy to trust. And I think that we make it really complicated with, like, how we're going to have trust in the future. That Dunbar number makes a lot of sense. With 150 people, I can love and trust everybody because I know everybody. At millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people together, how do I know people? How do I trust them at the emotional body level and the spiritual body level? Well, I don't know anybody that's solved for that. If they do, please let me know. I'd love to know how you get that level of things together. And then how those groups of people interact. Maybe they interact. I mean, if you think about 6 degrees of separation type notion, if you stood in 6 separate communities and you were a go-between between communities, you could actually hold that kind of personal connection across groups. And then if our economic system wasn't such that we're incentivized to do nasty things to maximize our own wealth, if there was no incentivization for that kind of behavior, if our wealth status and we're going to be taken care of on the planet was not determined upon how we quote unquote negotiate and deal with each other, then we might have this capacity to have a lot more of that kind of loving based trust. And I'm not arguing for utopia. I don't need us all running around in loincloths with flowers in our hair, but I do think that that those of us who have the experience of love as a basis of trust, you kind of know that it has an extraordinary value and an extraordinary feeling and experience. And if I had any ambition for all of humanity, is that they would feel loved and that their gifts would be honored and given a place.
Powerful. The gifts would be honored, right? And therefore we all have a place, a purposeful place. There's so many beautiful concepts you synthesized and put together in this short hour we have together. The question that really started the podcast relates, funnily enough, to something you mentioned earlier. So right now, when we accumulate wealth, maybe 2 to 3 generations out, maybe that wealth is still around in our family and we can feel safe and secure. But even that is not guaranteed, and it's something that often doesn't happen because there is a repercussion to what the old generation did, right? So what got me onto this quest was this notion of 7 generations, which is a notion in all indigenous cultures across the earth, not just in North America, this awareness that we are connected with the planet and with our own lineages. And so I've really been digging into that question, like what is a 7 generational vision? What is a vision for 210 years? And so I want to ask you, because we probably don't have the 3 hours that this answer deserves, right? But if you were to synthesize, what are the feeling points, and maybe what are some of the facts that in an emerging future we can already sense will be there in an Earth vision of 2229?
Yeah, obviously we speak in aspirational terms, like what we would have for them. I think of that point, and I think, wow, if I had like one big aspiration for humanity was that everything we touch is enriched before we're touching it. So that, our interactions with our planet or planets maybe in that period of time is such that our presence actually enriches those things. And likewise for our personal relationships, that our presence among other human beings or other animal species or maybe even alien species, that we're a benefit. That we're a constant benefit to the environment that we're in. Because if I think about that in big glowing terms, like everybody's making a benefit to the environment and the communities around them. Now I no longer have to worry about my descendants. I don't have to think about my personal descendants. Like, what am I doing for 7 generations of my family? People that are going to carry my DNA, because it doesn't matter. If all human beings are taken care of and all the environment's taken care of, that means that any descendant I have, from 7 generations to 1,000 generations will be taken care of. Because if it's all taken care of and it's all one thing, then we can stop this silliness of winning out over one another. The silliness of saying, hey, as long as I take care of mine and mine, it's all going to be good. Yours might go off the edge of the cliff, but as long as mine and mine are good, that's enough for me. That's just the most short-sighted human expression I can think of. And maybe maybe we have the luxury 7 generations ago, they couldn't even think like this. They couldn't even have a concept like this. And so we owe it so much to 7 generations ago to get us to the point where we have the resources, time, and intellectual depth of that time to imagine something much greater than what we have now. And so, on that spectrum, I'm just a person trying to make it go that direction. I'm just one of the people on the team called, hey, let's have human beings be a net positive to the world and each other. And I feel honored to do that. I feel very, very proud and honored that I get to be in a community of people that think that's important.
Powerful. And as you are one of those in that team, you created the movie WeRiseUP. And As you've created We Rise Up and it's about to get published, I just want to let people know, when will it come out? How is it going to roll out? How can we watch it? How can we host watch parties, show it to our groups, our Dunbar number, our corporation, etc.?
Yeah, so We Rise Up is going to have a premiere at Aspen Film Festival, I believe the 24th, 25th of this next month. Something like that. We can get that
end of September.
Yeah, end of September, and then we'll probably have a wide release early next year. You can go to WeRiseUp.com and track things there on our Facebook page. We Rise Up the movie is a great place to check out those.
I will definitely link the trailer, because the trailer alone is already getting people excited to watch this movie and
get the excitement of seeing what other people are thinking about and how they answer those questions for themselves. So we highly recommend that if you get a chance to see the movie, to see it with 4 or 5 friends, see it early enough in the evening that you have a chance to have a long conversation about it. The movie itself is not the point. Your experience of the movie and how you experience a shift in the way you see the world is the point. And so that's the thing we hope everybody shares the most.
Beautiful. Is there anything else you want to point towards or make sure people don't miss?
Yeah, if you're interested in the futurists and other things, be sure and check out Storyworks in the coming months. We're working on a book project about futurism, and likely to have a We Rise Up follow-up TV series, a futurist TV series. Be looking at all these things and support your local storytellers and filmmakers who are trying to make the world a better place.
Michael Shaun, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're super welcome. Great being with you too.
And that's that, another episode of Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast. I truly hope you had a good time listening to this interview and gain some form of new perspective, insight, or knowledge that serves you, that enriches your life. And if that's the case, make sure to share this episode, subscribe to the podcast, follow the social media on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and simply be part of the conversation. One step at a time. Wherever you are, have yourself a stellar day.